Hi.
Can I ask you on panel 1A?
Yeah.
Is Jan Hutton coming? Is Rachel Jolly coming?
It's Rachel Jolly.
Okay.
It's Rachel. So she'll do the DFAT presentation. She's the DFAT person.
Okay.
Yeah, it's Rachel.
Yeah, I have one
just thought-
slide presentation. I don't have her slide presentation.
She's DFAT. She's the one that...
Yeah, so that's
Well-
also so maybe they've combined the permanent secretary and her.
I thought they were different. No, they're different. I saw them last night. So,
Yeah, so this morning I got the permanent secretary. Oh, I actually
last
removed
night
it. Yeah.
you should have got... last night you should have got one from DFAT.
Okay.
From Sue Ellen.
Yeah. But it also has the permanent secretary's one in it. So when I opened it,
Oh,
the
it's
first one is
both.
the permanent secretary's one. I'll just scroll through it to check that it's.
Yeah, right.
So don't worry, I have access to all those emails. I'll put it on.
Yeah, okay.
But yeah, I was just like when I
Because Sue Ellen sent one last night and then one...
yeah,
this-
and I'll talk to them this morning
Yeah,
as well.
they're
I have
all
access
here.
to all the emails.
Yeah.
I don't have like face recognition of.
Oh,
other
sure.
people.
Yeah.
I mean, when it's their
Yeah.
session, I'll connect with them.
Yeah. They'll be here.
Okay. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because I
With
know-
Ryan. Yeah. Yeah. We start at 8:40 now. Oh, yeah, there's nothing for the opening. It's just speaking. Yeah. Thanks, Hayley. Anti-filling this one, yeah? Ryan, second row. Hi everyone. We're going to start in the next minute, so if I could just get everyone to take a seat. There's plenty of seats over here. If you need, there's still a fair bit of room. Close the doors now. Hi, welcome. It's good to see you all. Thanks for coming. My name's Cam. I'm a researcher here at the Development Policy Centre at the ANU College of Law, Governance and Policy. Thanks again for making the time over the next couple of days to spend with us for the second decade of AAC has now begun. So thanks again for joining. To begin today, I'm delighted to introduce Auntie Selina Walker to deliver our welcome to country. Auntie Selina is a proud Ngunnawal woman and the granddaughter of Auntie Agnes Shea OAM. Auntie Selina continues her grandmother's legacy of influencing and driving change in the Canberra community. She is the co-chair of the ACT Reconciliation Council and a founding member of the Yirrabui Yawong Child and Family Aboriginal Corporation, which helps to improve outcomes for Aboriginal families and children. Auntie Selina also advocates for Indigenous people within the justice system as a member of the ACT Victims of Crime and Justice Committee. And in 2024, Selina was awarded the ACT Local Hero Award. Please join me in welcoming Auntie Selina to deliver the welcome to country. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Yuma. Galaganya Jolina Walker. Darawanuna Wo. Hello, my name is Selina Walker and this is Ngunnawal Country. I want to first start by acknowledging my elders, the Ngunnawal elders, and pay respect to my elders past, present and future. I also want to acknowledge a recent passing of my grandmother, Auntie Agnes Shea, who was the most senior Ngunnawal elder here. Also want to acknowledge any other Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people that are with us here this morning. Welcome my brothers, sisters, aunts and uncles. And of course I'd like to extend that to all of our non-Indigenous friends that have joined us. Welcome. The Ngunnawal community are the traditional custodians of Canberra and the region. You may not be aware that the Ngunnawal nation is made up of several family groups and not just individuals who represent this country. Therefore, as a community, we have an elected body known as the United Ngunnawal Elders Council to represent us, along with the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elected body of the ACT. This is important for you to understand and acknowledge, for our identity is a collective identity. There are other Indigenous and non-Indigenous people from around the nation, the country and the world who have come to live on Ngunnawal land. I would like to acknowledge and welcome you all. The tradition of welcoming the people to country is a practice that was handed down by our ancestors, old people and elders from the beginning of time. Before entering another person's country, you would first announce your arrival and not enter until the traditional owner formally welcomed you. The reason for this practice was to protect your spirit whilst in another person's country and also to show respect for the country of which you were entering. It's wonderful to see that this practice is now recognised and respected. I guess it's not like entering into someone's home unless you're first invited. The Ngunnawal people, as within all Aboriginal people, have a great heritage that we would like to share with all Australians from every walk of life. As you are aware, Canberra means meeting place, and Canberra has been a place of gathering for many Aboriginal tribes of Australia to come together to deal with important business and also for ceremonial purposes. Our Ngunnawal ancestors believe the importance of people gathering to build relationships, share knowledge, and to celebrate the gift of heritage and history. We believe it's important for all to recognise our unique history and to gain understanding that our land is our heritage and how loss of the lands has disconnected so many Aboriginal people from their spiritual links, cultural heritage and identity. Reconciliation is not just a word, it is an action, and it's a human rights movement. As an Aboriginal person in this country, I've only been counted as a human being for 58 years. Let me repeat this while this sinks in. I, as a beautiful black woman in Australia, have only been counted as a human being for 58 years. I'm only 44. We are very young in our reconciliation journey here in Australia, but we're on the right path. By incorporating proper cultural protocols like welcome to country, smoking ceremonies, didgeridoo playing, etc., We are on the road to true reconciliation. It does still hurt me, though, that my dad was born a tree, that my grandmother was a mother in this country before she was a human being. So I ask you all to take a moment and think about how old you are, how old your elders are, and how old your children are, and what you can do to contribute to that reconciliation human rights movement. I want to highlight that yous will not remember me today for the words that I have said. Yous will remember me for how I made you feel. We are humans, it's our emotions that make us human, it's our emotions that create long-term memories in our brains. That's where the change lies. However I made you feel this morning is what you need to carry forward to influence the changes that this country needs, that our kids need. So, on behalf of the Ngunnawal people, in the spirit of reconciliation, with the cultural authority of my grandmother, and as a 2,300th generation caretaker for this country, Yumalandi Yunanga Yerabu Yangu, which means you may leave footprints on our land now, or in other words, welcome to country. When we talk of footprints, we don't speak about our physical footprint. We talk of the work that we do today for the people to follow tomorrow in the footprints of our elders and ancestors that have come before us. Think about what footprint you would like to leave and the potential of the footprint of this gathering. Continue to work towards that. And just remember that when you walk on the land of the Ngunnawal people, or anywhere in Australia, you are walking on the blood of our ancestors. So please tread lightly and treat it with respect. Good luck with the rest of the conversations over the next couple of days, and God bless. Thank you very much, Cam.
Yeah, thank you, Auntie Selena, for that powerful and important welcome to country. And thanks for stepping in at quite short notice. So, today's opening is unexpectedly abbreviated, as the Minister's Office advised us late last week that she was unable to join. So we are starting a bit later than scheduled. I did propose that we start at the same time and do a verbatim reading of some of our best blogs, but my team advised against it, so it's probably for the best. I'd like to welcome a few special guests here today, including the Permanent Secretary of the Tuvalu Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Labour and Trade, Pasuna Tuaga. Welcome. I'd also like to welcome senior representatives from other partner government and development organisations, members of the diplomatic community, and officials from the Australian government. And a very special shout out to a big group of DFAT locally engaged staff who are joining us today and will be presenting on a panel. Welcome, wherever you are. We also, again this year, have a great big group of Australia Awards scholars with us, which is terrific. So welcome. And welcome also to our colleagues from the University of PNG and the University of South Pacific. It's great to have you back again. And welcome to all of you who've travelled, whether it be from Hackett or Hanoi, Kathmandu or Kayleen. I've got heaps of these, so I won't do them all. We have about 600 person attendees this year, which is our biggest, biggest in-person presence since we came back from COVID in 2022. So thank you again. When we gathered here at this time last year, we knew that big disruptions were on their way in 2025. And we've now seen what some of those look like. Unprecedented aid cuts by the US as well as European donors, fragmenting and shrinking multilateral space, the acceleration of polarizing narratives at the expense of nuance and evidence, and the continued rise of a more transactional, tactical view of how development and foreign policy relate. Many of you know better than us the effect that these disruptions are having, and that they continue to force very difficult choices on development organisations and agencies, and more importantly, on the local partners and communities that they work with. For better and worse, the aid and international development system that has existed for decades is now gone. And the question facing us is what might replace it. And whether whatever does replace it is up to the task of confronting the big challenges that we know are still out there: poverty reduction, climate change, conflict and fragility, health and human development. These challenges haven't gone away and in many areas are accumulating and compounding. But the good news is that we know that progress is possible because we've seen it before. And that's why we're really pleased to have such a terrific group of committed researchers, practitioners, and policymakers here over the next couple of days to discuss and work through these challenges. We've got a good mix of realists, reimaginers, and reformers, some of whom have been coming here for a decade, and others joining us for the first time. I hope you get a chance to catch up with old friends and meet new ones. Just a few housekeeping points. All our rooms that we'll be using for the conference have instructions on emergency exits and so on. Please note these and ask our very friendly staff if you have any questions about this or any other issues around the conference. You can spot us by the high-vis lanyards that we wear. Dev Policy's mantra is to foster open, evidence-based and respectful debate. Please keep your interventions to the point, avoid speechifying, and be respectful. Just a reminder also that many of our sessions fill up quickly, so if there's something you're particularly keen on, I'd advise you get there a little bit early to avoid disappointment. And also during the breaks, if you can kind of, once you have your food and drink, if you can kind of move away from the catering areas, they get quite congested, so grab your food and mingle. Finally, please download the conference app. You should have a registration link for this. There have been changes to the program since we printed it, and the conference app is where we keep things up to date in real time. I'd also like to take this opportunity to thank and acknowledge our 2025 conference sponsors, the Australian Centre for International Agricultural Research, ABC International Development, Chemonics, DT Global, Palladium, Respond Global, SMEC, and Tetra Tech. Thank you again for all your support. It helps keep this conference strong and independent. And I'd invite all delegates to visit our sponsor booths, which are just outside the main theatre here. Of course, our major partner for the Australasian Aid Conference since its inception in 2014 has been the Asia Foundation. The Foundation continues to bring a wealth of regional expertise, fantastic local partners, and high-quality analysis and research to the conference. We always enjoy working with them and their very talented team. Tom, Peter, Nicola, Anthea, and Hayley, thank you so much. And with that in mind, I'd like to invite Laurel Miller, the President and CEO of the Foundation, to make some opening remarks. Laurel first joined us at AAC in 2023, where she gave a terrific and still very relevant keynote on how we might think through some of the implications of artificial intelligence for the sector. That keynote is up on our blog, and I commend it to you. Please, Laurel, thanks.
Good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Asia Foundation, I'm delighted to welcome you to the Australasian Aid Conference. The Foundation is honored to be co-convening this again with Stephen Howes and our friends at the Development Policy Center. It's wonderful personally to be back at the ANU after my last visit 2 years ago. I would like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples on whose traditional lands we meet today and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. And I'd like to thank Auntie Selina Walker for her really heartfelt and thought-provoking and beautiful welcome to country. I pay my respects to any First Nations peoples who are here today. For those of you who may not be so familiar with the Asia Foundation, we're an international nonprofit organization that is working with partners across Asia and the Pacific to solve the toughest social and economic challenges. We bring more than 70 years of experience and very deep local knowledge to our work in more than 20 countries, where we're improving lives and expanding opportunities. The Foundation is passionate about ensuring that people and perspectives from across the region are present in conversations like those you're going to be having over the next 2 days. This year, we're delighted to have colleagues of our own, as well as some of our partners, joining us from Malaysia, Vietnam, the Philippines, Nepal, and Fiji here. After a tumultuous year for those working in international development, it's heartening to be coming together here for quality discussions, for constructive contestation on the future of development cooperation. We find ourselves in a very different environment than when this conference was held just a year ago. And convenings like these, I strongly believe, are more important than ever for us to share knowledge and generate new ideas. In the many lively sessions and networking opportunities that I know you're going to have over the next couple of days, I'm sure that a positive contribution will be made towards tackling new and persistent challenges and grappling with what contemporary development practice should be in a new global environment. Finally, I'd like to thank the outstanding conference organizing team for the many hours of preparation put into making this event happen and making it successful. We have an incredibly rich agenda in front of us, and I wish everyone a fruitful and enlivening 2 days. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Laurel. It's great to have you back. Okay, so now we're going to get underway with the conference proper. So over the next 10 to 15 minutes, we're going to smoothly transition into our first group of panels. Either stay here if you want to stay with panel 1A, or please make your way to the first sessions for session 1. There'll be a bit of setup time, but we'd urge you to get there reasonably quickly because, as I said, the rooms will fill up. But welcome, and the conference is open.
The other controls, I say, so I'm guessing it's the top.
Hey, brother. David, how you doing, bro? Yeah, I'm solid, man. I'm solid. David, I'm Darian. Love PNG, bro.
something in place from June because the votes funding goes to 2027, so we've got a 1 year. For the little bit. I think all those things are crazy.
There's a clicker, but I'll check about the screen view. So let's see. Over here? Yeah, this one. Yes, and it depends how you want to go, like with your slides. If you want to stand up here, a lot of the time people end up doing that if you're doing a sort of longer talk. But it's totally up to you. Yes. Yeah. Forward and back. Yeah, yeah. Sorry, the Q&A ones are here. These are for Q&A, right?
It's very recent.
It's
Very recent.
yes, yes. It's only in the last few weeks.
Oh, okay.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for attending our panel today on a very important topic for the Pacific and Australia. I'd like to start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land we're meeting on, the Ngunnawal people and other people and families that have continuing connections with Canberra and the region. I'd also like to pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are with us today. I'd like to thank the Development Policy Centre for organising the Australasian Aid Conference and for putting together what looks like it will be a really interesting couple of days of discussions. I'd also like to acknowledge the significant contribution that the Centre has made to Pacific labour mobility research over the years, and particularly the contributions of Professor Stephen Housen, Associate Professor Ryan Edwards. My name is Rebecca Warner. I'm a director at Palladium International, and I have with me today, how does this work? Thank you. Three panellists who I'll introduce. Labour mobility is now an established pillar of Australia's economic partnerships with the Pacific and Timor-Leste. It has created opportunities for tens of thousands of workers to come to Australia on temporary visas to earn an income that they might not have otherwise been able to earn, send remittances home to support their family and pursue their goals. More recently, labour mobility has also paved the way for new migration pathways to Australia, which help to deepen our relationships with the region and people-to-people ties. These new pathways, of course, include the Pacific Engagement Visa and the Whalapili Union Treaty Stream. I'm pleased to introduce our three panellists who will share their perspectives on labour mobility and migration between Australia and the Pacific and Timor-Leste. Rachel Jolly is Assistant Secretary of the Pacific Labour Mobility and Engagement Branch in the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade. Rachel's going to describe how the Pacific Australia Labour Mobility Scheme, or PALM scheme, and Pacific migration more broadly are contributing to stronger partnerships between Australia and the region. Pasuna Tuaga is Permanent Secretary of Tuvalu's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Labour and Trade, and the Permanent Secretary will provide the Government of Tuvalu's perspective on broader access to migration pathways to Australia. And last but not least, Associate Professor Ryan Edwards is Fellow and Deputy Director of the Development Policy Centre. Ryan leads Pacific migration research at the Centre, and he will share some of his latest research findings and also make recommendations for evolving the PALM scheme. Oh, going backwards. That's why. Okay. I want to start by just outlining some key facts about the PALM scheme. It enables workers from 10 countries, 9 Pacific countries and Timor-Leste, to access employment opportunities in Australia in sectors where there is a domestic labour shortage. As of September, there were 31,225 workers in Australia under the scheme, and the scheme has become an enduring feature of Australia's economic partnerships in the region. This is fundamentally because of the complementarity between Australia's workforce needs and the demographics of our neighbours. Australia has an ageing population and a shortage of workers in certain sectors and regions, and countries in our region have youthful populations and much higher unemployment rates. Australian businesses that want to be part of the PALM scheme go through a process of approval, which is managed by the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, which co-manages the PALM scheme alongside DFAT. Approved employers are responsible for recruiting workers and also for selecting the countries that they recruit from. The PALM scheme, as it is today, was launched in 2022, and it brought together what had previously been two programs. So labour mobility started in 2008 with short-term opportunities that were opened for workers focused largely on the horticulture sector. And then 10 years later in 2018, the longer-term opportunities were opened up in a wider range of sectors. So the PALM scheme now offers both the short-term, which is up to 9 months, and longer-term, up to 4-year visa options. This slide shows which sectors are employing workers under the PALM scheme. I think Rachel actually has a similar chart, so I won't dwell on it. Along with agriculture, meat processing has emerged as a dominant sector, and PALM is now expanding into new sectors such as aged care and early childhood education and care. A really important feature for labour mobility is the triple win nature of it. And this is something that Pacific countries themselves value about the scheme, that there is a duality to the benefits. So first, Pacific workers, of course, gain an opportunity to earn an income in Australia. Second, labour-sending countries and communities gain economically from the skills that the workers acquire and the remittances that they send home. And thirdly, the Australian employers gain access to a stable and long-term workforce. The benefits of labour mobility more broadly include the people-to-people connections, and I'd just like to note that workers in Australia contribute quite often to the life of our regional communities through their participation in local sports teams, churches and other organisations. And employers, when you meet them, often have a really strong affinity and relationship with their workers, many of whom return year after year and visit the workers in the communities back home. There is now a really strong body of research and evidence that demonstrates the positive development impacts of the PALM scheme. The Pacific Labour Mobility Support Program, which is funded by DFAT and supports Pacific countries' participation in the scheme, has undertaken research into the PALM scheme's development impacts in sending countries. Economic modelling estimates that since July 2022, workers have remitted 1.7 billion Australian dollars back to the Pacific and Timor-Leste, directly contributing to community development in sending countries. Workers and their families use remittances for a range of things. Building or renovating houses is often the first thing that the families work towards, and it's the number one reason that workers cite for joining the PALM scheme. Workers and families also invest in economic ventures back home, including starting new businesses. And women who join the PALM scheme often prioritise paying for children's education and supporting households to build the goods and services they need. And there are also workers who join in order to support family members access specialist health services, including for the elderly and people with disabilities. A survey of 2,732 returned PALM workers also found there is a significant skills dividend. In addition to technical skills and training acquired on the job in areas like tractor and forklift driving, computer skills, food preparation and those types of things, workers acquire a range of soft skills through their work in Australia in areas like teamwork, time management, budgeting and financial literacy. And these soft skills are particularly useful when the workers return home, for example, when they're setting up businesses. 2/3 of surveyed workers have said that they start a business when they return home. And 94% of those that participated in the survey said that their lives are better than before they went overseas. The PALM scheme's visa settings and operational processes are now well established. And as Pacific labour mobility has expanded and matured, the focus of Australia's development assistance has shifted from an initial focus on expanding workers' access to the scheme and on continuing their access to the scheme during COVID, to a broader objective of maximising the positive outcomes and development benefits of labour mobility for workers, families and sending countries. The Pacific Labour Mobility Support Program now has an increased focus on fostering the systems that can improve support for workers and their families, and doing this in ways that can be sustained at schools, at scale. And this is done by working on the broader labour mobility ecosystems beyond the labour sending units that coordinate worker recruitment. With the PALM scheme now a key pillar of Australia's bilateral relations in the region, and it features in several agreements and commitments, there is also a greater focus on tailoring support to partner countries so that their participation is aligned with their development objectives. So I'm going to turn to the panel, and the first person to speak will be Rachel Jolly. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'll just wait a couple of minutes while my slides come up, but say it's really wonderful to be here, and I'd like to thank both the Asia Foundation and the Australian National University for putting on this conference. It's a real honour to speak to you about Pacific labour mobility. I think Rebecca set the scene really, really well. We see migration, including in the Pacific, has been happening for centuries. What my presentation is going to touch on today is around some of the initiatives that the Australian government has developed in partnership with the Pacific and Timor-Leste to really strengthen Pacific labour mobility with Australia. And what I really wanted to say from the outset, that this has really been an iterative project over time, and you see that most with PALM, and I'm going to focus mostly on PALM because there's a lot of lessons there. But it's happened through listening, changing, pivoting, engaging, and really importantly for a conference like this, it's happened through really looking at the evidence base and investing in the evidence base and research to make decisions and to think about the future. So there are many people in this room that I can see who've played a really significant role in that, including in the panel here today. So I just wanted to start with those words. So I'll focus mostly in my presentation on the PALM scheme, but I also wanted to touch on a few other labour mobility pathways with the Pacific that are really important and worth mentioning. The first is the Pacific Engagement Visa, and those that work on the Pacific and around the Pacific would know what that is. But essentially, it's a specific, bespoke, permanent residency pathway just for the Pacific and Timor-Leste. This has the opportunity to strengthen those people-to-people links, integration and access to Australia, and really build a bigger diaspora here in Australia. And we've seen from the birth of this program really strong interest in the Pacific. For the inaugural ballot, which was in June 2025, I believe there was over 56,000 primary registrations received. And this year we've seen Samoa and Kiribati join for the first time, and this year we've received over 61,000 primary registrations. So that really shows the demand and interest in a scheme like this. Our grant numbers, so that means people that have actually been granted the visa, has also grown. We have more than 1,600 grants now, and we're starting to really see the human impact. And this section is about the human impact of some of those families that have made the journey to start their life here in Australia. And what I would say from some of the anecdotal stories we're hearing from the PEV is that it's not a linear move. It's not a move to Australia. It's actually that ability to move back and forward between Pacific and Timor-Leste and Australia, building that really strong bond and those people-to-people links. And just to bring the human element, I have, for example, just a quote here from a PEV holder from Tonga, and he arrived this year into Sydney. And he said about the ballot that being selected through the ballot and granted the visa was life-changing for us. Compared to other migration pathways, we're expensive and complex, and this gave us a clear way forward for our family. Resettling in Australia came with its own challenges, but the support we received has made a big difference, and that include having access to Medicare and guidance through the transition. So that's a real success story. We do have something called the Pacific Engagement Visa Support Service that is supporting with linking up PEV holders and their families to services here in Australia, and importantly to have a job. So one of the key features of the PEV visa is that workers must have a job before they come to Australia, and that presents its own challenges for people looking for work before they're here in Australia. The other special pathway I wanted to speak about, and I note that we have the Permanent Secretary from Tuvalu here on the panel, is the Palladium mobility pathway. So this is a really innovative pathway and partnership with the government of Tuvalu. So this pathway enables annually up to 280 Tuvaluan citizens to make the choice to come and live in Australia with their family. The ballot opened this year, and we're starting to see some of the first visa applicants come here to Australia from early October. We also have our first Palladium baby, which I was saying to a Permanent Secretary, with our first baby born here through the program. And for us, this initiative really reflects that deep and enduring relationship between Australia and Tuvalu under the Palladium Union, and it underscores that commitment to working together on bespoke pathways that are in the best interests of both Australia and the Pacific and Timor-Leste. So that sets the scene with some of our other visa programs. But I wanted to focus now on PALM. And PALM is really interesting from a research and development project in terms of labour mobility, because it's been going on for a long time now, and it's quite a mature program. Starting with the short-term work under the seasonal worker program. Before that, there was a pilot. Then alongside that, we had a long-term stream, and now coming together as PALM. So with such a mature program, it really allows us to look at what's worked really well and where we need to do more work in the future. And with a mature program, it means the relationships with all stakeholders here in Australia is mature, and our relationship with our partner governments are mature. And I think one of the biggest differences now with PALM is that there is diversification in terms of what different countries want to get out of the scheme. In terms of the size of their workforce in Australia, in terms of the skills they're wanting their workers to develop for developing their own labour mobility, their own domestic labour markets, as well as some of the particular social issues they're concerned with. And that is fantastic. So the challenge for the program is being able to respond effectively and appropriately to those very bespoke country aspirations and pathways that are emerging through PALM. So this slide is just giving you a little bit of data. So currently in Australia we have over 31,000 PALM workers, and you can see workers are roughly split between the short-term scheme, which is mostly horticulture workers, and the long-term stream. And in the long-term stream, that includes sectors such as tourism and hospitality, aged care, and meat processing. And down here you can see the makeup of the 10 different countries involved. If you dive down into the next level of data and you look at, for each different country, what the split is between short-term and long-term workers, you'll see huge divergence. And that again goes to reflecting country aspirations in terms of where they're wanting their workers to situate. Really importantly with PALM, under our MOU arrangements, it's up to the labour sending countries to choose who is selected and how that recruitment process works. There we go. So some of the things that we've heard and we're currently focused on is strengthening what we call the skills dividend. And the skills dividend is around something we've heard from the Pacific. How can we ensure that when workers coming here, they're learning new skills that are relevant to countries back home, because PALM itself was designed as a circular labour migration program, and I'll talk about skills a little bit further in the slides. The other one is worker preparation and welfare. So before workers come to Australia, they must undertake pre-departure training, and different countries approach that in different ways. But as we've learned, you often experience information overload, and you're learning about things in a vacuum without being in Australia and seeing it. So what we've been embarking on for the last year or so with partner countries is really looking at worker preparation afresh. So what do we need to support workers to learn before they leave? How can that learning continue while they're in Australia? And then importantly, how can we continue that learning when they return back to their home countries? Supporting families. What we've also learned is making a difficult decision to leave your families for an economic opportunity in Australia is not an individual decision, it's a family decision. And for families to be involved in the decision making, in the goal setting and the understanding of what that means for their family and community is another area that we're working closely with partner countries on. And finally, we are talking about it in terms of reintegration, but an area of focus for the Pacific is, okay, labour mobility has been going for a long period of time, but when workers return, how can we support them into economic pathways, helping to build local businesses, helping to start local businesses, helping to use those skills they've developed in Australia? So these are all really interesting questions, and many of them I'm looking forward to engaging with many of you in the room who probably have a lot of really bright ideas on these topics. Embedding the skills dividend. The Australian government has made a formal commitment, and that formal commitment is to train 1,500 PALM workers in Australian TVAT qualifications. So at present, that's been mainly in aged care, but not only. Under this commitment, we've trained over 700 workers to get their Australian Certificate 3 in individual support, which allows them to work in the aged care industry. A really exciting new development is a pilot in early childhood. So this is a new sector that's being piloted. We have 14 Australian accredited and trained early childhood educators from Papua New Guinea working in the Northern Territory. They're working in centres in Katherine and Alice, and they arrived earlier this year. Early findings from some of the evaluations have shown that this has been a really positive pilot so far, both from the employer side and also the educators themselves. The educators themselves have mentioned they've learnt really new skills, they've saved money, and they can't wait to take those new skills back to the early childhood sector in PNG when they finish up. From the employer perspective, these 14 educators have opened up over 100 places, early childhood places in Katherine and Alice, which has provided certainty and continuity in these businesses and provided opportunities for people living in those towns to go back to work, and importantly allowed essential workers from Darwin to relocate to Alice and Katherine. So that to me is just a fantastic example of the power of the PALM scheme, both in terms of delivering benefits to the Pacific and Timor-Leste, but also here in Australia. Well, family accompaniment pilot. And Stephen Howes, who I see up the back through the development blogs and his advocacy here at the Development Policy Centre, was a real advocate for starting a pilot and a program like this. This, for the first time through PALM, allows workers to bring their families to Australia. We have about 150 families that have arrived, and when we say families, that's spouses and children. And under this program, families can receive Medicare and family tax benefits and also the early childhood subsidy. So far, through our evaluations, it's been a positive experience. We're seeing local schools and local towns really embracing having more families in their towns, and we're seeing very high rates of spouse employment. So I think the midterm evaluation showed almost 80% of spouses being employed. So we were very heartened to see the really strong integration outcomes of the pilot so far. Finally, something that we've been asked to do for a long time, we have a lot of really good data, Rebecca touched on it, about the importance of the program in terms of remittances. A study that was done by ANU and World Bank showed that the average palm worker remitted around $1,500 a month to their home countries, which is a life-changing amount of money. But we didn't have up-to-date data on the economic contribution that palm workers make to Australia. And importantly for this program, Cam challenged us at the beginning to talk about what does development look like going into the future. This is a program that really is about mutual benefit for the Pacific and Timor-Leste and Australia. At the moment, we are currently undertaking a study that will look to the impact that palm is making on Australia's economy and in regional communities. So consultations are happening all over the regions. We're excited to engage with anyone in this room who'd like to hear more about the study. The study will have a quantitative component to it, but also some regional case studies that will give the colour and flavour and provide those kind of human storytelling to the benefits of palm to Australia. And I talked a little bit about increased support to the worker journey. So this is that focus on worker preparation, starting before workers leave, throughout their journey in Australia and when they come home. This is something that partner governments have told us is really important, employers have told us is really important, and local stakeholder groups. And finally, Australia also has quite a large program, the Pacific Labour Mobility Support Program, that supports directly the labour sending architecture in the Pacific. So that includes operations and mobilisations, but it also supports technical support and support across that labour mobility ecosystem. So increasingly on things like supporting economic reintegrations, families integration into the process, and those kinds of things. I will stop now because I've talked a lot. I'll just let you have a look at these priorities for the coming year, and happy to talk about all of them. But for my final piece, I'd say that country aspiration piece and the diversification now of interests and priorities with a program like PALM is incredibly interesting, both as a study of a mature program, but also a mature labour mobility program. And the challenge for Australia, but also for our partners, is how we respond to those priorities and we respond to those bespoke interests and priorities. So thank you very much for your time.
I'd like to now introduce our second speaker from the panel, who is Permanent Secretary Pasuna Tuaga from Tuvalu's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Labour and Trade. Thank you.
Anyway, good morning to you all. And thanks for the introduction, as well as an opportunity for me to present in front of scholars and academics. It's my first time to present in front of such a crowd like this, an audience like this, so bear with me. Distinguished colleagues and friends, It is a privilege to speak with you today about the strategic importance of Australia's labour mobility initiatives, as previously mentioned in the first speaker, our first panelist. That's on the PALM scheme, the Pacific Engagement Visa, and the popular Whalepili union visas. These programs are more than migration pathways from Tuvalu's perspective. They are instruments of diplomacy, development, and resilience. For Tuvalu and other Pacific Island countries, I believe they represent opportunities to strengthen our livelihoods, build our skills, and ensure mobility with dignity in the face of climate change. So today I will highlight how these schemes complement one another and how they can evolve to meet long-term priorities and what the future of Pacific Australia, migration and integration might look like. Before delving into the core of my presentation, let us look into some important facts about Tuvalu. We have a very small population, a narrow resource base, and the threats posed by climate change and sea level rise are real. We have a very high unemployment rate. And with these huge challenges, opportunities will always be limited. But responses presented through initiatives such as labour mobility could help lift us out of these development challenges. However, we need to understand that even though Tuvalu fully support and favor labour mobility, where our people will have to move abroad to work, may indicate that we are contemplating relocation at some point in time. But no. Our national interest is to remain sovereign and inhabited, while using labour mobility as a tool for resilience, not as a substitute for relocation. So the bottom line is we are not seeking relocation, we are seeking resilience. And mobility is a tool to strengthen our ability to remain at home. So the key message is that climate change makes mobility inevitable, but the challenge is to ensure it is safe, planned, and beneficial, turning a potential crisis into an opportunity for resilience and integration. Sorry, I have to make sure that I...
It's his left one, I think.
Oh, it's the left one. Yeah. Ah. Sorry, I missed out on this slide, but this is the slide that I just previously explained. we also need to look into the history of Tuvalu on labor mobility. Tuvalu has been a very strong advocate for labor mobility, given its successful participation in organized labor mobility in the past. Dates back to pre-World War II, phosphate mining in Ocean Island, in the colony of Kiribati and Gilbert's and Ellis Islands, and also in Nauru. And we've also been participating in seafaring for a number of decades. And these mobility pathways like PALM, PERV, and Falipili are also tools that we can use to diversify our income, build skills, and create diaspora networks. These resources flow back to Tuvalu, reinforcing our capacity to adapt and thrive at home. So labor mobility, in our perspective, is a triple purpose instrument, driving economic growth, enabling climate adaptation, and deepening diplomatic ties. That together reinforce Tuvalu's resilience and, of course, Australia's leadership, since we are talking about labor mobility programs and schemes in Australia, or that Australia provided to the Pacific Islands. So today we'll explore how Australia's labour mobility schemes of PALM, the Pacific Engagement Visa, and Falipili Treaty Visa are shaping Tuvalu's development, aspirations, and the future of the Pacific Australia integration. So labor mobility is more than economics. It's a diplomatic tool that strengthens Australia's ties with Pacific Island countries while supporting development outcomes. For Tuvalu, these pathways are central to resilience in the face of climate change, as presented in the slide. Let us look into the PALM scheme overview. And I don't really want to go into details of this since my previous speaker has eloquently explained about the PALM scheme. So this allows the Pacific Islanders to work in Australia temporarily, but it has two streams: seasonal work and longer-term placements. And workers earn income and remittances and send these remittances home and gain skills that can benefit the communities. Speaking about the diplomatic importance of palm, again, palm is not just about filling labor shortages. It signals Australia's commitment to the Pacific by engaging directly with workers and communities. And it builds trust, strengthens people-to-people ties and connections, and reinforces regional stability. We can also look at how these evolving objectives for palm. I've included 4 points on these evolving objectives for palm. Because to keep delivering palm, or to keep delivering, palm must evolve. And the first priority in our perspective is to ensure that the workers are treated fairly and safely. And Australia must strengthen employer accreditation, housing standards, grievance mechanisms. Protecting workers from exploitation is not only a moral obligation, it sustains trust between Australia and Pacific Island countries. By embedding welfare safeguards, palm remains credible as a development and diplomatic tool. Palm must also evolve from entry-level placements into a skills ladder. Workers should gain qualification in sectors like the aged care, construction, ICT, and renewable energy, to name a few. Skills portable is key, where Tuvaluans should be able to use their training, both in Australia and back home. It is about building human capital for Pacific resilience. And the third one is the long-term separation of families can create social strain in Pacific communities, and therefore need to have a pilot family-friendly policies covering all those participating in palm to reduce such pressure on families and communities. Of course, we've heard from presentation previously that there has been some initiatives being implemented on labour mobility. But I'm mentioning this because Tuvalu is not covered under this initiative. And we hope that we'll be able to participate in this. I'll skip this slide since a previous speaker has been talking about it. So how pathways relate? The visas from these visas will form a continuum where PALM provides short-term income and skills. PERV offers permanent settlement for families in Whalepili as a treaty-based and climate-linked. Together they give Tuvaluans choices across temporary and permanently and permanent mobility. And PERV requires job offer prior to visa grant. And under Falipili, this is not required, which is good for Tuvaluans, make things much easier for us. And PERV is not set up to facilitate the visa holder to go into and from Tuvalu, which is unlike the Falipili Union Treaty Mobility pathway. The challenges and safeguards. The challenges include risks of exploitation, family separation, as I've previously mentioned. But one of the challenges, the remittance costs are very high. Because alone in the Pacific, I think it's one of the highest in the world, often exceeding 10% when sending these remittances back home. So these are the challenges that we face on labor mobility. And the future of our Pacific Australia migration, I think it's about integration. And we will expect more treaty-based pathways, like the Falipili, if we are going towards that trend. And the recognition of qualifications, portability of social protections, and climate mobility will be mainstreamed, and Pacific diaspora will become key partners in development. In this slide, I try to stress that mobility is not just an economic pathway, but also a climate adaptation strategy. The PRD, it recognizes, for us, the Pacific, the leaders, the forum leaders of the Pacific have recognized that mobility as a legitimate adaptation tool. And therefore, our partnership with Australia will be very helpful in shaping how these regional frameworks on mobility, on climate mobility, can translate into practical opportunities for the Pacific. I have 2 more slides, if you can bear with me. So what are the opportunities for Tuvalu? As shown in the slide, is to align skills training to national priorities, leverage the diaspora remittance into investment, and advocate for tailored settlement packages. Because remittances are not only support daily consumption, they should not only support daily consumption, but they can be transformed into long-term investments that build resilience, create jobs, and strengthen Tuvalu's sovereignty in the face of climate change. Settlement packages include things like cultural continuity and identity, language and education support, prioritizing the recognition of Pacific qualification and pathways into higher skilled jobs. And these mobility pathways can be used strategically in diplomacy and resilience planning. So what it means for Tuvalu. Labour mobility is simultaneously an economic lifeline, a climate adaptation strategy, and a diplomatic instrument. Together, these dimensions support Tuvalu's resilience, sovereignty, and regional cooperation. So to conclude, PAM, PERV, and Falipili together form a mobility ecosystem. It refers to the interconnectedness or interconnected set of pathways, policies, and support systems that together shape the how people move for work, settlement, or adaptation. Instead of looking at one visa or program in isolation, mobility ecosystem emphasizes how different mobility options interact and complement each other to create a broader system of opportunities. So the challenge ahead is to strengthen safeguards, align skills with national priorities, and ensure that remittances and diaspora networks are harnessed for long-term resilience. If we succeed, labour mobility will not only be a response to economic and climate pressures, it will be a cornerstone of Pacific sovereignty, dignity, and regional integration. That's my final slide. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Look this up. Good morning, everyone. My name's Ryan. In addition to thanking all of the conference sponsors, I would like to thank one other indirect sponsor, and that's our friends at DFAT, which also support the centre through two of our much largest programs, our work on labour mobility, which supports me bringing here and brought me back from a obscure little liberal arts college in the New England countryside in 2019. So thanks for getting me back to the best country. And also the P&G project. And it's really without this support that we wouldn't be able to do all the activities we do, provide the public goods for the sector, and create this kind of ecosystem at the scale that we do. So thanks to DFAT for their continued support. And in particular, thank you for seeing and encouraging our role as a critical friend, and encouraging us to make the most of our academic independence, which I'll do so with now. So, where are we at with Australia-Pacific migration? So about 2.3% of the migrant population in Australia is from the Pacific, defined as though the population that was born overseas. Australians think that's way higher than it really is, like with many types. Maybe it's because of the salience, and it accounts for about 1.4% of the total population. Our colleagues have already told you about the two sort of main schemes, PEV and PEV Plus, the Falipili agreement, and PALM. The point I'll make there is near the end though, how large are they in the scheme of things? It's about 1% of our temporary visas and of our permanent visas to date. It's pretty small. But interestingly, Pacific immigration is actually much more supported than the rest of our immigration program in terms of the scale and the directions that the government have been taking. We've got a wonderful paper on this if you feel the need to do further reading after the seminar. I'm going to try and answer 4 questions today that were those in the abstract. The first one, how does migration actually, why are we talking about migration in an aid and development conference? Although I feel like I don't need to anymore because you have all made this very obvious and real now, but I'll take a slightly different tact. Then, how can the PALM scheme evolve to continue meeting the diplomatic and development objectives? How do these visas all relate to one another? And then look a bit more forward-looking, what does the future hold? Question 1. So I'll make 3 points on question 1. For those of us that have been working in the aid space for a while, you really could not have predicted in 2000, 2005 when we were talking about giving more seasonal work opportunities to the region, that things would look the way that they are today. And Australia's approach to migration and mainstreaming it in the development program looks very different to what it did a long time ago. Number 2, this is the one that I'm most excited about. Migration is really probably the single most powerful tool that we have to reduce global poverty and inequality in our toolkit. It's the best one we've come up with. And the reason why is quite straightforward. Relative to many anti-poverty interventions or development policies or programs, this is one of the few that you can argue is both transformational and slightly more certain. Most of these things, we don't quite know whether they work. I'm thinking here especially about governance programs and economic support ones that are trying to trigger growth, because these are the really important things. Whereas, I'll show you why. Migration is one of those ones where you kind of know what you're getting at the start. And it happens in many, many ways. And finally, in the Pacific, it's uniquely more important than elsewhere. So when I say that migration is really important for development, it's at an aggregate level and at a personal level. The gains from labour liberalisation absolutely dwarf those from financial and trade liberalisation in terms of what's left. Would more than double global GDP if everybody could go and live where they wanted and work where they wanted. And what we see from the research literature is that really both destination and home countries can benefit quite a bit overall. But just like trade, just like any policies, we create winners and losers. There's costs and benefits with all these things, and so it is important to focus on lifting aggregate welfare. And then when it comes down to the individual level, the way to think about this is a thing called the place premium. And I can give you an example of that just with myself. So my parents moved to Australia from a town called Cyan Mills on the Northern Irish border. We're sort of right near Strabane, where the Troubles were, and Dad was in Belfast. I can go back and visit the family, see what they're doing, what their status quo are. How many of them are ANU professors or professors at all? 0. How many of them went on to university? 1 or 2 out of the extended family. How much I earn relative to them. By simply moving with the same skills and the human capital, you multiply your income and your opportunities, and it really is that simple. That's the place premium. And that's just one channel. That's the direct channel. And you see this here. This is an experimental study, which is really the only way to pick this up and fully address the selection into the migration process for New Zealanders Tongans going to New Zealand. And you see the gains jump immediately after moving, and they don't actually grow all that much over 10 years. It's an immediate thing. And the other point that I wanted to make, because this is an aid conference and we're talking about aid, migration affects development in many, many ways, but we often talk about remittances. And remittances globally are many times more important than aid. Many times now. And in the Pacific, part of the reasons it's more important, I might actually skip this one, so I'm worried about time, but it's largely due to what a lot of ANU economists have written about for a long time, is the really classic economic challenges that the region does face in terms of relatively low domestic demand, challenges to generate jobs, high trade costs, all these things we've known about for a long time. And as I acknowledged at the start, having more labour mobility opportunities has been something that the region has been asking for decades. And even now at the moment, so in most countries, the government, especially in small island states, is the biggest source of employment. Now, working in Australia is. Moving on to the next one. Question 2. First, what are the actual objectives? First one, people-to-people ties, the diplomatic objective. Second one, provide employment, skills development, income and remittances for participants. But I'm going to assume that's a bit broader, and that's also focused on the countries and the families and everybody else back home. And then there's the domestic objective, which is centred around labour shortages, which is actually a contested term in economics, because is there actually a shortage, or are we just not paying people enough and we need to invest more in the skills so people will move to them and make these positions more attractive? How do we actually know if we've met these objectives? Some of them are obvious. You can just count things, right? Employment, how many people are coming? And then all of these other things will be a function of the number of people who are participating and how many we can generate. So there's a real quantitative piece there that is important for anything else to happen in the stream of things. Other ones are more nebulous. I was going to pick on people-to-people ties, but I see pretty convincing evidence of that in front of me and around the room, so I'm not going to do that. But for all of these other things, for doing real development impact evaluation, you need to use counterfactuals, you need to measure things, And I wanted to acknowledge DFAT at the outset. As they were stepping up in 2019, they built on the work that had been done by some colleagues at the back. I can see Pip back there and his team at the World Bank when doing the Seasonal Worker Program report and impact evaluation, the Pacific Possible report that looked at the potential of the gains. The foundations had been laid. David McKenzie and John Gibson on rigorously looking at the RSE before that. We knew what was likely to happen from more labour mobility and that it was a best buy for development before we did. And then as we did, DFAT colleagues did reach out to us at the Development Policy Centre and the World Bank directly rather than through a much broader sort of omnibus bagel type program facility type investment and asked us to do some evaluation, analysis and advice in supplement to their big programmatic investments. And this is sort of how we got to where we are today, which I think they deserve full credit for and it is a really good way to work. So quantity, how have we been performing against the objectives? The 2008 launch that was mentioned at the start, that was the pilot and it was announced in 2012. Growth was pretty slow. And so in these first few years, you'll remember dev policy blogs, discussion papers about the issues on the demand side, employer surveys, how we could improve that. And then we did see this scale up. The Pacific Labour Scheme was introduced 2018-19, and then we had this slightly noisier period with COVID. But what you see here, look, the key point of this slide is line go up, right? Going up to COVID. But then you might look at the more recent years, and to get the total quantity, you're going to have to stack the red ones and the yellow ones on top of each other because they're the short and the long. So we're now looking at a number that's quite larger, but I wanted to be able to show this part of the trend too. So against all of these objectives, the quantity over time, we're now at about 30,000 today. And the trend was really good. It was growing up. And I'll talk more about where it's at now. But what about the quality and the development impacts? Well, for a bit more detail on this, I would say please go and read our reports or our blogs on these things. What we have done is a big project called the Pacific Labour Mobility Survey. I'm quite excited about it as a researcher because it's sort of the first large-scale comparative evidence on labour mobility, but also the first sort of panel data study for the region, which means you can track individuals over time and use the longitudinal aspect of it to answer a lot of life cycle questions that you can't otherwise do with cross-sections and so forth. And it's also comparative. It covers multiple countries with consistent instruments and multiple schemes. And most importantly, in every sending country, we have a generous control group, a comparison group that allows us to discern impacts and use counterfactual-based approaches. You can see here the countries that it has covered, covers many questions, and right now we're in the middle of the second wave, which has expanded from 5 countries, including Australia and New Zealand, up to 7. So Samoa and Fiji have been added, which is very exciting. And when I say talking about the impacts, we sort of approach this in a corpus of ways. You can look at it quite qualitatively and subjectively and ask people in participating communities what they think, which was this graph, about whether their experiences and the impacts have been positive, negative, very negative, and here the blues are the positive ones. Or we could go and say what I've done in that top figure, use everyone who is over here working, take all of their observable characteristics and use that to predict what that exact same worker using the large household survey back home would have been earning back home, and then take those differences to calculate precisely what the earnings gains are. And we can use a similar approach to that to make comparisons across a whole range of development outcomes, and we have been doing that. So that's quite important. It means it's systematic, it means it's large scale, and it deals with this issue of causality. Next up. How about on the labour shortages? We've also interrogated that on a recent paper. In this one, we used administrative data from Australia, so all of the tax records of you and of everybody, and we did what's called a triple difference. So this is probably the most rigorous econometric design that you can take in this setting, where you're comparing people within locations in similar occupations and their trends relative to unexposed occupations and areas and sectors over time. And really, we found no effect on incumbents. There was no evidence of any sort of big effect on the most low-skilled, least mobile Australian workers in areas where it was of the SWP, because we wanted to do it before Palm, where it's most active, which is a good news story. But whenever we started to interrogate why this was going on, all the evidence does sort of point to the motivation for these seasonal schemes, that is the domestic demand side and filling jobs that were not there. So on the left-hand side here, I've plotted every region in Australia at the SA4 level and the share of the population that is working in agriculture and forestry and fishery, for the ag sector basically, before the SWP was scaled up, and then the population growth leading up to that. So these were areas that were growing much more slowly in terms of people coming there, in terms of population growth, so there were fewer workers, but then at the same time, we had farm workers in the country were declining, while every other sector, labourers were pretty constant, every other sector was growing. So we were seeing this structural change in the Australian labour force as well that is consistent with the initial motivation to the scheme. So I actually do line up, I was sceptical of the labour shortages argument at the start, but now I probably line up in that side of this is exactly what it is doing. So how can we keep meeting the objectives? This is a more recent figure. The one on the right was from me using the latest data over time. The black is the total, and the red is the short-term and ag picture. And you can see from around June 2023 through till now, a decline of around a quarter, from 20% down to 15%. And if we use the government's own analysis, so this is from the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations, where they've taken the two most major schemes, it's even quite more striking. And this is when there was a reform to the deed and guidelines put in place for the approved employers as to what's happened in ag. So the seasonal workers, right, the seasonal component of it, which was really the success I showed you on that first time series. So, how can we continue meeting the development of diplomacy objectives? I would conjecture that at the moment it's largely a quantity story again. We need to get back to growth. I've got here a little sort of 5-point roadmap which we could do that, but really the essence of it is we need to optimise palm short for seasonal work and palm long for long-term structural gaps, and as the ladder that PS was talking about before, the ladder into our broader migration program, which is incredibly skill-biased and skill-set. So there's a review process underway at the department, and DFAT and other colleagues, and hopefully myself as well, have done a real good job on listening to workers, listening to countries and the region, what happens. We also need to do that with the employers that are bringing people over here, that hold the scheme up, basically. It's not hard to actually fix when you go through the details and talk to them about these things, and the key is really efficiency and scalability. I would argue that it's not so much realised actual demand that has fallen, it's that we've put the price up of taking a worker into Australia for these employers. And we need to bring that price back down again. A second way, there's a lot of latent demand sitting in some sectors that is being held back because of area restrictions and postcode restrictions. Aged care is the biggest one of this, and this would align with actually the demands and the type of jobs that many countries would like to see offered, so we can lift those area restrictions immediately. And there's other sectors, childcare, I was glad to see mentioned before, other services sectors where there are jobs back home, tourism, there's some movement in tourism at the moment, but most importantly, probably construction. When you go around sort of the villages back home, everyone is building. The first thing they do with the money that's coming back is building. And a lot of Pacifica communities here do work in trades and construction. It's a really obvious skills one to lean into more. The pilot, oh no, the pilot was successful. So we get 3 though, don't we, PS? Just kidding. So the pilot was deemed successful. So we could end family separation, as we've been calling for, because a lot of the social issues around the scheme have related to family separation. So I would argue that we can place those decisions back in the hands of the families themselves who know best. And I'll skip ahead a little bit, because otherwise I just won't get through anything. You know about the two main schemes. There's the Fallapelli treatment and the PEV. The main reason that they're different is one requires you to get a job before you can come, and it requires you to come to hold on to it. Second one doesn't. They've both been immensely popular. You can see across countries how it has gone over time. So year 1 and year 2. The red is the most recent year. Immensely popular. So far pretty successful. There's been some teething issues, as many of us will know, in terms of actually having to process and get the documents right and so forth, but I think that's being worked out pretty well. The other thing, so how do the visas actually relate to each other? We now have a situation where you could have one worker working for one employer who is on a single short palm visa, a multi-year short palm visa, a palm long visa, one that would be on one that has their family with them, one that might have just come over on PEV, or one that might be on some other condition. There's this inconsistency now, even within the same workplaces that I've seen a couple of times. And this creates confusion, it creates perceived unfairness, it has the potential to undermine the social contract that the scheme's built on. The most common PALM transitions that we see are employers getting fed up with the costs and moving their Pacific workers onto other lower cost visas, including permanent skilled ones, and welcoming them helping them apply for PEV to do the same. We've also seen temporary protection and bridging visas. I won't talk about that much because that's something that many people could talk about all day. But I guess the key point there is that it's not specific to PALM. We see just as many people applying for protection visas to work out of PALM as we do out of student visas and visitor visas and so forth. And it's kind of remarkable that the PALM managers in the department have managed to get those numbers down vis-a-vis the other ones. Who's applying for PEV though, out of the onshores? Mostly PALM and students and skills in demand. So of those that won the ballot and then put in the application, these are where the onshore applications are coming from. So we are seeing some transitions, and the transition rate is about 20% of PEV visas are from people who already hold some form of an Australian visa and would like to see that turn into a permanent one. So the real question, I guess, is how should these visas relate to one another? I can be pretty fast here. On PALM Short, it works best when it's separate, when it's circular mobility and it's kind of fixed and it's compartmentalised. We can't really have a one-size-fits-all because what PALM Long is trying to address is really quite a fundamentally different issue to what the farms are when you go across the employers and look at them and talk to them. And the issue there has been the expectations of sort of what their long-term plans are, what the employers' long-term plans are, and the workers. And so what I would suggest here is that we can answer the portability calls for long PALM by letting them move after the first year, as has been done in several other countries with these type of schemes. And after 4 years, we can put in place a permanent option to sponsor. However, I think PEV should be kept separate. The fairness of the random ballot, the efficiency of the random ballot, means keep it completely separate, no queue jumping. People have said, oh, they should get priority access. No, get another pathway in place. And so, relatively high rates of overseas employment in several sending countries do help to explain why and where labour mobility is such a hot domestic issue. Here I've plotted the rates for everybody, but they double when you do it for men, as you would expect. And what this has meant is that employers have started to move elsewhere, largely across to Melanesia, but we've also seen a real diversification in sending country participation. It used to be dominated by Tonga, Vanuatu and Samoa. Now we see Fiji, Sols and Timor-Leste have absolutely caught up and are really the big players. So it's now much more broad. And where should we get to? Part of the theme as we were initially discussing this panel was when will the PALM scheme be sustainable and what will a sustainable PALM scheme look like? So I would put 4 points up and then I will stop. PALM we want it to be the first choice. We don't want employers to have to prefer something else that's easier, namely backpackers or other things, and workers as well. And the worker reference is with respect to going on a protection visa or something else. And I've said here Tinbergen's rule is respected. Does anybody in the room know what Tinbergen's rule is? What about everything bagalism, imported from America and Ezra Klein? It's the idea that each policy instrument that you have should probably try and target one outcome. Maybe one or two more. Development is rife with people doing everything bagalism and disrespecting Tinbergen's rule. We're trying to do everything with everything. We could afford a little bit more respect in this case, I think. And then get the policy settings stable so that demand and supply actually start to come close to meeting each other as to where they would be, rather than when you go out and talk to both sending countries and employers, there's a number of distortions in between it being there now. I don't think we're at a steady state of where we could be in that regard. So that's what the second point is about. And then I've said already that it would be nice when PALM Long starts providing a lower skilled complement and a ladder to the rest of our migration system in addition to PEV. That was why it was motivated, and this is why both PEV and the PLS was introduced at the start, because the Pacific countries were typically, other than Indo-Fijians, not competitive in the broader migration program because it was so skill biased. And integration, well, what I would like to see there is the number of Pacific Islanders living, working and studying in Australia versus to back home just more closely reflecting their wishes. For many countries that have got compacts, they have reached a steady state. Not everyone has left. Those that have got an agreement with the US or with an agreement with New Zealand, I'd like to get closer to a steady state. And I'd like New Zealand to stop being the pathway, the highway stop on the way to Australia, which it has been for a really long time. I'll stop there. I've got some suggestions at the end. But thank you. And,
Okay, is this working? Well, thank you, panellists. I didn't want to intervene too heavily on any of those presentations because they were so interesting. But of course, we have a auditorium here full of people, and some of you, no doubt, have burning questions. So we'll turn it over to you. Could you please? Sorry, I'll just ask you to please introduce yourself when asking a question, and as Cameron so eloquently put it, don't speechify, so please leave the preambles short and get to the question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that great presentation. Margarita Coppolino, pronoun she, her. I'm the current co-chair of ILGA Oceania, which is Australia, New Zealand and the Pacific. ILGA being the International LGBTIQA, we're the global peak and do work in UN. So Oceania is one of 6 regions. Just in regards to the Pacific, and I know about the program in regards to the labour hire, and we know of people actually using the services. It'll be good to know the contractor that works for DFAT to do that particular project, are they doing around working with our LGBTIQA people, particularly when they come to Australia and then go back, particularly where we've got 5 countries that don't criminalise homosexuality.
Do you want to answer that question, Rachel?
I can. Thank you for the question. And just to say, in terms of our support for Palm in particular, we have a very strong inclusion lens. One of our goals is to increase female participation in the program and people with disabilities, but also LGBTQIA+. So I'd be happy to provide you with links and contacts with both our development support program, but also colleagues who work for the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations here in Australia in terms of supporting workers who are already in Australia. So, but I guess the high level point is that inclusion piece is a key part of our objectives, and it's a part of many of the countries we worked with as well, their objectives too.
Okay, thank you. Any other people having a question? The person up the back in the camel-coloured shirt.
Hi everyone, thanks for that. Thanks for the speakers. My name's Michelle. I work with a managing contractor, but I'm just a Papua New Guinean with my question here. I appreciate the second speaker, Permanent Secretary. I resonate very much with what you've shared and appreciate it. My question though is to our third speaker, and reflecting on, and I have a lot of family and friends who have been on the PALM scheme, and it's been great hearing their stories, the ripple effects it has on community, on family back home. My question is really around the PEV, and I say this because I, as an educated Papua New Guinean, I'm only a few in my tribe and community who has made it that far. And so when reflecting on, I guess, the very low number of people who have made it that far in our country, to then, and I have friends who have left because of, the opportunity. I've had to think about, my children first in terms of education and health. Accessing those services here would be great. But as a Papua New Guinean who's very passionate about my country, if I leave, who's going to help nation building there? And I'm in the international development space. International development is about that. It's about developing our countries. And so when I see all of them, most of them are actually employed already, and they're leaving. What does that mean for our countries? And I know some of them will hate me for making this statement because, it's a personal choice and I cannot speak for them. But how do you think about your children and your family's future, and then how do you think about your country's future? We have so many issues that need to be sorted. And the bulk of the population are in the informal sector. There's only a few of us in the formal trying to keep it going. And so when we see many of them leave, it puts a lot of pressure on us that are still there, trying to still help out. We all have a role to play. And if we keep leaving, what happens? So that's just me as an individual. Very few of us that have made it that far. We have so many secondary schools, not enough universities. And thanks to development partners and donors who have helped us in that journey to get far in our education and careers. But we are needed back home. So just putting it out there as part of the research, if you could look into that as well. And not saying that we end it or any of that. Please don't do that. But I think we need to think about the broader, bigger picture here as well. What happens to nationhood in our countries? We are needed back home as well. Thank you.
Panel, I think the question was directed at you, Permanent Secretary, but I don't know whether anyone of you might have something to say about permanent migration pathways and impacts on the countries back home.
Yeah, thanks for that question. But for Tuvalu's experience in terms of people leaving, I think it's a big issue as well for us. Because there are some people in these formal sectors of work, they've just left because of the opportunity that's been provided to them through the PALM and also through PERV are much more attractive than staying home. But what Tuvalu really insists on these people, and even for those people trying to go through these schemes, is that to make sure that they come back because they are needed back home to support their families. Because, for us in the Pacific, we live in extended families. And we really need these people to come back home. And at the same time, we need to strike a balance between these schemes and also the development needs back home. Because no one will be doing the work in terms of construction and all that in our islands. And from the experience of those in the outer islands, and I'm talking about those people who do not have access to much more opportunity in the formal working sector, we are starting to lose young men who are supposed to do all this work like fishing to support their families just because of these schemes. And that's why we really wanted to encourage those who, before making a decision of going abroad, but especially with the attractiveness of these Falipili Union visas, we would like them to come back. Because that's why Australia is also given, under the Falipili Union, you can just get a PR, but you don't have to stay in Australia. You can continue to live in Tuvalu, but you can have access to services as a permanent resident if you want to. But there's always the choice for you to come back home and help with the development needs of Tuvalu. Those are the things that I can share with our experience. Thank you.
And I guess I'd just say, I hear what you're saying. It's a really important challenge, that balance between providing opportunities overseas, the power of remittances, how that can transform a family and community, but leaving and the impact that that has on communities and nation building. I guess what I'd say about the Pacific Engagement Visa, I don't know off the top of my head what the PNG cap is, but it's capped. And relative to the size of the PNG's population, it wouldn't enable large numbers of people every year to go. So it's capped, and the rationale behind it was to strengthen those people-to-people links. As Ryan mentioned, the Pacific diasporas in Australia are relatively small, and that's partly because outside of these special purpose pathways, the Pacific's ability to access Australia's migration system was limited. So it was to create those people-to-people links. And once people have a PEV for a while, they have permanent residency. So then you have that ability to live both in Australia and back in PNG. But your question is a really important one, and it's a question each individual country and community needs to make themselves. How much migration is too much migration, and what kind of safeguards do we want to put in place so that the migration is a net benefit and a net development benefit to the country? So it is a balance and a tension and something worth raising, so thank you for raising it.
Thank you. There's probably time for, unfortunately, one more question, and I think the fellow at the back might have had his hand up next.
So good morning to all of you. I'm Sachi from India, GIST International Foundation. Regarding this climate vulnerability, do PALM is thinking of having some skills to climate resilience and climate adaptability among these specific countries, and how migration has been considered for being socio-emotional competence issues? Is there any specific action point from the PALM to tackle such socio-emotional issues? So two questions. One is this, how it is helping the climate adaptability and resilience, and how socio-emotional context can be dealt with. Thank you.
Thank you. I might address the first question first. So on the social and emotional issues, yes, that is a key feature of migration, and it's been a real focus of some of our programming over the last couple of years. And I wouldn't say we have all the answers, and we're working with our partners on it. But one of the partnerships we now have is with the IOM, and we're rolling out a new program of family-centred assistance around migration, which looks to go to precisely around what you're talking about, involving families, open discussions about emotional challenges of family separation and migration, tackling that head-on with additional supports throughout the migration process. Separate to that, when workers are here, and this was part of the strengthening that Ryan talked about of the scheme and domestic operations, each approved employer in the scheme needs to have a welfare and wellbeing officer and undertake cultural sensitivity training and have these kinds of supports in place to support workers in their host sites with these kinds of issues. We're looking at other ways to do this. So we're in the early stages of developing a worker app, so something on people's phones where people can access materials and various learning platforms to try and strengthen the avenues and tools we have to support workers better. And then, of course, sending countries have their own approaches to this. So, for example, the Vanuatu government has their own reintegration policy that covers both social reintegration, which includes worker preparation to returning home, and economic reintegration. So different countries are taking their own approach, and we're funding some of that work through our development program. And then on the climate vulnerability, I think climate skills, and that would be a really relevant area to develop for the PALM scheme, given some of the climate vulnerabilities the Pacific is taking. I think it's a point well made, and something that, we'll take on and are considering. Thanks.
I think just to add on to that, in terms of looking at PALM, as a climate adaptation strategy for Tuvalu, as I mentioned in my presentation, because it provides, because given that, as I mentioned in my presentation, the jobs or there's job security in Tuvalu has been affected as well by the impacts of climate change. And labor mobility could be one of those responses to our creating new jobs for our people to participate in. And going to, coming over to Australia, as what my colleague has mentioned, they can participate in climate-related jobs. For example, for Tuvalu, we have this program, they call it the TCAP, the Tuvalu Coastal Adaptation, Climate Adaptation Program, where we will we'll be building like seawalls, but these are more like reclaimed land as part of our adaptation. But at the same time, we use that additional or reclaimed land as part of our development. But in doing so, we need the labor, and with the skills that can do such kind of work. So coming over to Australia and working in some related jobs offered by PAM, they can bring back these skills to Tuvalu and then help with our adaptation work. So that's how it can relate to the question that factoring in this, the climate vulnerability of the small islands and how PAM could assist us with. Thank you.
Look, thank you. I'm really sorry that we all spoke and delivered very interesting presentations and cut off the opportunity for questions. I'd encourage you, if you have questions, to approach members of the panel in the break now. So I'd like you to join me in thanking our panel. And thank you all for your attendance.
Sorry I went over and had to rush. The last part was the most important bit on regionalism.
Yes, that's the most important thing.
Because it's on the Solomon Islands PIPS paper.
Yes, I saw that. Yeah.
And I think potentially in a similar space to you, where they've changed the law to encourage dual citizenship, so that people don't feel the need to rescind or go. And
but I also want to make a point where, because Australia is providing a lot of development assistance to the small island, and I think immigration would be the best option for Pacific Islands. Just because Australia cannot flexible in the immigration and laws, because if they open up, it would create a lot of remittances.
And not everyone will leave.
For example, if